We back. We are here. We are back. I am Sineo. Sineo, Sineo, for those who have been here with us. This is the 58th episode of the Lyrical Ones podcast. If you're seeing the visuals, the visuals of me grasping the microphone right now as it's placed in front of me, there's a level of intentionality behind today's subject matter. So, with that, Alfluent, how are you doing today?
I am doing well, you know, pressed down, battered, bruised, but not beaten, not destroyed. Had some wonderful breaths of air, oxygen today, which you really can't convince me is, not partially poisonous because, everybody that breathes oxygen, leaves this earth the same way
True.
without it. They
Yeah.
leave without it. And so, um, part of that human condition. And so right now, just in stepping in and sitting in gratitude, um, like it's like quicksand, trying to steep in it, try to settle in it, try to be immersed in the gratitude uh, as I navigate this wonderful planet and this life we live in. How you feeling today? How you doing?
Um, I am, I feel like every episode has been another reminder, a touchstone, a pillar, and uh, just something to hold on to. So present, I'm thankful. I'm doing my best to exercise gratitude. I've had my moody Judy days this past couple of days. There was some crises happening, and then you get in your introspective mind and you start dissecting everything. You start looking at everything with a very intensive analytical view. And when you speaking to myself, but also saying it to others, I have to remain in control of my thoughts, my feelings, my perspective, and how I take things, how I receive things, how I'm, processing things. And, prior to us getting on here, I said, I'm just so immersed amounts of empathy, just an exorbitant amount. I can't even begin to like try and communicate the level or to what degree. I can't even measure. It's unfathomable, this this level of empathy that I'm feeling. And there's a sense of just facetiousness every once in a while because I do have a very dark sense of humor. And so, with all that being said, I'm here. I'm here, and I'm really eager to have this conversation that we're getting ready to have because it's timely, right? This is episode 58. This is July 14th. It is a Wednesday. We are coming from Pacific Standard Times, right? This is the evening. So, you have brought up some things. What do you want to cover? What is one of the things we could dive into, because they all have, there's a very good intersectionality amongst the various things you have brought up prior to us starting this.
Man, I guess we gotta start when we talk about empathy. I guess we gotta start with CTE, right? Chronic
Yeah.
traumatic en- encephalopathy, right? It's like it's progressive and fatal brain trauma. It's well, it's a disease caused by repeated trauma to the brain. Um, and for me, as it's marked by things like memory loss, dementia, um, mood swings, uh, and I didn't plan on um, there being more incidences or occurrences or events surrounding people with possible CTE, possible, repeated brain trauma, um, I think about myself and just like I because I played football, because I played rugby, but more so football. Um, Even some of the impact I've taken, playing flag football, playing baseball. I don't necessarily know what it's like for my brain to be operating at full capacity or even the full 10%. Um, I don't I don't know what a healthy version of my brain would look like. Um, and maybe I jip myself in that, uh, by playing sports and type of sports, collision sports, not just contact, but collision sports. I don't know, you know, how much trauma, how much damage I caused. And I pray at some point we get to a point where we can examine uh, the brain thoroughly before death. But the signs of CTE on the brain, the disease on the brain is usually detectable um, posthumously, and that's scary because folks like today's event, sometimes people get in a space where they have suicidal thoughts and they want to end the pain around, you know, what they're feeling, and often as a result of their trauma. Um, and a lot of times where, the trauma that we often talk about um, is not brain damage. But when it comes to brain damage and the brain trying to fire signals the way it's supposed to produce, certain chemicals for the brain to function properly, to repair itself and to repair the body during your sleep cycle. Uh, it's it just puts me in a position where like I always have to think, am I able to heal from what I've been through on a physical brain function level? Um, Not, there's like emotional trauma, spiritual trauma, different things that, we can, presumably work through. Um, what's the process, for curing a disease that you can't, really detect, except from, certain uh, certain scans, that are not normally prescribed. So yeah, it's again, right. I'm just like in this quicksand, a swamp of gratitude, because I don't have answers, and so when I don't have answers, I have to honor and be thankful for what I do have um, outside of chaos. And then within chaos, right, I have to, honor my hope and my faith, that things will work out, in a way that's good for me, good for the people I care about, um, and stay optimistic. Uh, yeah, ran into my cousin Mo today. He reminded me to be optimistic on his birthday. Shout out to Mo. Um, my my first cousin, it's always good to see family especially when you don't expect to see him, and especially when it's not at a funeral. Um, Again, yeah, like I'm just in that space of gratitude, and yeah, I think the first thing I think I thought was, some sort of empathy too, as I heard about free agent NFL player um, being booked and arrested for burglary. I don't like to mention that domestic violence part because the domestic violence attribute to the burglary charge just has to do with his relationship to the people who lived at the residence. Um, it had nothing to do with actual, physical violence or to any person, um, but that they were um, his in-laws, and it was his wife who made the 911 call, and you just hope that the player gets some help and recovery, and then he's finds a way to move forward. Especially if he doesn't find a team to play on this upcoming season. Uh, yeah, it's a wild world. It's a wild world. Wild world.
Definitely. Yeah, it calls to light a lot of things, right? My own relationship with playing combat sports or participating in combat sports. Um, being a child playing contact football, right? Wearing pads and having a helmet and playing in, you know, being 11, 12 years old and me being young and wild and not thinking about long term anything, right? CTE to in at my age of 11, 12 wasn't a common topic, wasn't something being discussed, wasn't anything a part of any conversation. And I really appreciated uh that kind of exertion of energy. I liked wrestling. I liked watching and being a participant, right? Even though they say don't perform these moves at home, I was doing it, right? Like my favorite sport was the sports where I could have contact in a physical sense with somebody, whereas an exertion of energy beyond, this boundary of not having contact, right? So football was great. Tackling, I love tackling people. I love being able to like throw people around and being like, yeah, let's have fun in this context. We were playing all kinds of contact tackle like games on the street with no pads. So this was common, right? To pretend to go through these violent situations, right? Violent in the sense that there's these extremes that are put on people, and it's contact, it's combat, and being a child not realizing every time you go head up with somebody, you're pretty much making a deposit in a bank account that the payout is going to be more of a long-term harm to your brain.
Right.
And we've seen through the years, especially in our lifetime, how it's impacted football players, right? There's documentaries, there's videos, there's all kinds of different evidence or information or perspectives on the potentials of how the constant traumatic like impact to the brain leads to various deficiencies, challenges, and unhealthiness. And I often jokingly with those that are close to me always attribute certain things that happen to me, getting jolts up and down the spine. I would always attribute that to my time playing football from the age of like 11 to 15 because I threw myself into every situation I could, right? Whether it would, it wasn't like I was trying to be, an athlete for a career. It was I'm in the moment having fun and I'm going to do whatever I can to enjoy this moment, which at this time means I'm just going to go head up, right? Everybody, oh, you want to go head up, right? And I was always happy to go head up, right? Get a headache here and there, hurt, ache, do it again. And in this situation, seeing someone who maintains a lot of space within the sports world, who's a
Right.
professional athlete, who's been doing it beyond measure in terms of my scope and experience. And now him trying to, you know, hopefully get the resources or support that he needs, right, to have a sustainable outcome, something that's healthy or viable for himself, knowing what's happened to others, knowing and seeing how it's had impact on so many, in the sports world, or in that sense of just, using your head in a physical sense, it's so, it's concerning, right? It goes to that, yeah, like when I seen the news and I'm like, well, what happened? Like, I hope he's okay. What happened? Because you're sometimes you're just basing it off of your limited experience or limited information, or sometimes you base it off of your gut instinct based off of an accumulation of different variables. And when it comes to this particular individual and who they are and how they show up, they've always been one that I've looked to as, always bringing up a talking point or saying something of interest that was motivation for myself, that
Right.
was to me more in a positive light, and held itself to a measure that, you don't often see all the time. And so to hear all these different accusations and things, it was troubling. And it was, seeing people, people are going to try and comprehend and process the information as they will. But as of, as it is kind of known in the social media internet world, compassion and empathy isn't always the first thing people go to, right?
Right.
It's like, well, I have my favorite team and you ain't on my favorite team. So now, you know what? I'm going to exercise my level of, my differences, my kind of competitive mindset.
Right.
You are the opposite, or you are the opposition. So now I get to make fun of what you're going through. I get to disrespect you, right? Yeah, I'm living in I have an anonymous position. I'm living in anonymity because my virtual profile lets me be that. So I'm just gonna go off and make fun of and put you down and disrespect you. And it's, it's concerning because it's, we're seeing right now uh the need for a discussion on accessibility, right? I
Yeah.
was one of those idiots that was talking about different ability people. It ain't different ability. People have disabilities, right? I had to listen enough, and I've been, doing my best to seek out perspectives on disability to understand the nuances, right? The different variables of the gray area, the variety, the spectrum of people who have disabilities and live in a world where there's less access to what they need. And when it comes to mental health, right, it's easy to say, oh, he gets paid millions of dollars to do that, to play, and now this is this is, oh well, that's his life. And it's like, I just don't have the apathy in me. I don't have the ability to just be like,
Mm.
oh well, that's his life,
Yeah.
right? Because I play football. What happens when I have kids and they want to play football? What happens if there's a viable option for them to continue a legacy or a lineage, or there's various opportunities that present itself because they play football? And it's worth the discussion, right? Like you were saying, I don't know, I don't have the answers, but I'm grateful enough to know that I do have access to and what I do have control over right now. But even more importantly, I'm thankful we can have a conversation about it. I'm thankful we have enough awareness to open up the dialogue, to have it on a platform like this, so people have access to it, so people can hopefully gain something from this or have their own conversation, because we do live in a society where it's easy to lose scope of how important the brain is and why it's
Right.
important to engage in mental health on a broad spectrum, on a broad scale. It kind of brings me to the recent conversations they've been having about a certain pop singer who is trying to gain the rights and ability to be able to self govern,
Right.
due to the fact that they grew up in celebrity, right? Which to me is a crisis within itself if you don't have the right supports or people who can give you the boundaries and the space to grow within the confines of celebrity.
Mm.
This pop singer is now fighting for just ownership and rights over their own human body, and the ability to have some autonomy. And again, that empathy, that sense of, I really feel for people. And you know, there's always a conversation of like, oh, being nice means you're now vulnerable to being taken advantage of. And I'm nice with boundaries. I'm nice with
Mm.
distance and space. I'm real nice with that. I'm nice at upholding my capacities and my limitations and placing myself in a position where I ain't got to take on the world. Like I can feel for people without it having to compromise my livelihood or my sense of joy. I could feel for somebody and understand their pain and not have it be a dread on my life because I have my own regulatory systems and
Yeah.
supports to keep me pushing to have access to it where I don't avoid it, where I'm looking to see how can I be a support, how can I be an advocate, how can I help. If I'm gonna be on social media, then I'm gonna talk about accessibility, right? It ain't for everybody, but somebody might peep something I say and be like, "Oh, dude's funny," or "He has some dope music," or "I like his messaging." And what
Yeah.
is this accessibility thing he's talking about? What is this universal design thing he's talking about, right? Because these different things play a factor in whether you a football player who now needs to step away from the game, right? Where we advocating for better healthcare coverage or better rights or more scientific standards and approaches and innovation and advancements in making the investment in the proper fields, right? Holding NFL to every degree to make sure not only are they putting forth the interest of figuring out how do they deal with CTE, right? What is the long term coverage look like? What approaches are they taking, right?
Right.
To really find new methods because people love football. People love it. And how do you sustain it without it being detrimental to so many, right? Because we could always say, "Oh, well, that's the price you pay," but I mean, let's be real. Is that necessarily the price we need to pay, or is that just because we're limited on our investment on advancing the safety, right? Advancing the safety standards,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's a nuanced thing, but I think there's room because I mean, I remember Ricky Williams and everybody was like talking
Yeah.
about weed and how oh he smokes weed and how this is horrible for him as an athlete. And then you go through and you start seeing the discovery of CBD and its usage in the
Right.
brain function and repairing and healing the neural connections within the brain and reducing the inflammation in the brain and all these different things, right? And that's the innovation I'm talking about, right? That's the if you take $1 billion industry and you say we're going to make an investment in creating more safeguards or creating more therapeutic means of healing, what's the problem, right? If they were advocates, right? Because I know they lobby for things and they lobbying for federal regulation and the taking away the legality aspects of marijuana usage, right? And opening up the doors where someone could then start to advocate on the Olympic scale for an athlete to cope however they need to using
Yeah.
marijuana, which is we could go every which way. Who's funding the data that's being acquired and accrued? But at the same time, I think of myself in testing the waters, and maybe it's a placebo effect. Maybe I'm just feeding my own ego, but I feel like it's had impact. Using CBD and understanding for myself, right?
Right.
There's many benefits people have seen. I mean, I've had family members that were dealing with cancer, going through chemo and the pain and the aches, and they had tea infused weed and all these other different things, right? That helped them manage the pain, helped them deal with the treatment. And I think there's a lot of overlap between all these different things when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to giving people the ability to heal, to get the autonomy they're looking for, and not to be judgmental, not to be disrespectful, not to minimize someone's challenges just because we do live in an apathetic world where apathy is available in such abundance. But I always push myself to talk about compassion and empathy, especially just for a fellow human being, and seeing these human beings going through what they're going through is concerning. And seeing whether you're a football player or whether you're a pop artist or whether you're just somebody who's trying to figure it out, I think we all would, there's a level of basic human right and humanity that we all reserve, that we all should have access to, that we should all be afforded. And right now, it's like, between the crisis and the many crises all over the world. It's easy to throw your hands up and say, "Forget it, on to the next one." And I'm like, nah, y'all, each one of y'all important, right? Each one of y'all deserve some attention. How do we do this in a sustainable fashion?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the further you, and the further anyone is from the poverty line, or the further below, individuals and families are, below the poverty line, um, the more they need ways to cope and manage, stress, um, and then
Right on. Thank you.
the le-
We trying. We're trying to have
thanks,
these conversations. Thank you for
then
listening.
and then the less options they have, basically, um, as far as coping and managing, that stress, like if you below the poverty line, you got to find ways to keep your mind busy, and then find ways to keep your mind calm. Um, and those, sometimes look like video games and weed. Sometimes, they look like, having a job and, going for happy hour. And then, people find things in between there. All right, not everybody can take the weekend off and go on vacation. Not everybody, can, have a job that, engages their mind, to keep busy, or to keep, from navigating through, destructive or, self-sabotaging thoughts. But like, if people can find that thing that, keeps them away from, you know, the traps of the, systematic oppression, where it's easy to, get a hold of alcohol and and become addicted. It's easy to, find some marijuana and find a way to cope. But if those routines or those things become habits that, cause harm, you know, the system basically says it's your own fault that you fell into the trap. And it's really messed up, because there are vestiges of the traps still throughout the system, and a lot of different fields and a lot of different arenas. And then, depending on where you are in your situation, it's not a trap at all, but an opportunity, right? You can say, well, I'll just start my own tequila brand, right? Or I'll just, open my own, marijuana dispensary, right? Or I'll, start a CBD infused brand of, homewares, um, and or self care items, and that's only accessible, at a certain threshold. And if you're an awareness, really, and if you're not aware, I think a lot of people forget that the folks that are going into the amateur field of the Olympic events, Olympic sports, are exactly amateurs, right? They don't get paid, um, a salary to do what they do. If they get endorsements and sponsors, they're fortunate, and otherwise, a lot of their travel stuff is coming out of, what the Team USA can provide, based on the money that they raise, and and any winnings that they may get, toward different championships and tournaments, throughout the season, in preparation for qualifying. But other than that, they're not necessarily, well to do, or you know living lives of, financial abundance. And when folks say, well, I'm just gonna cope and navigate in a way that I'm used to, when it comes to tragedy or crisis, the systems are still set up to catch them in the trap, while those who are, not necessarily athletes or, dealing with the same crises or traumas, have no problem using the same methods to navigate. Um, yeah, so it's really kind of just like a double-edged sword, and I think we just have to continue to like debunk myths and you know shrink the stigma and bring bring light, or the bring light to the truth of some of the dogma that exists around of some of these coping mechanisms.
Yeah, when you said that amateurs, it made me think of how there's this really weird value system that even I used to feed into. Like I remember I
Mm,
met Chris Tucker one time and I was like, he wearing Gucci shoes and a white suit at Virgin Records downtown San Francisco. Ain't too many black men in San Francisco just wearing Gucci shoes and a white suit walking around Virgin Megastore. I've been here many days, many days, because I'm broke, in between transitional age young man trying to figure this out. And I see this man coming down the escalator with a gigantic, huge buff guy, and I'm like, I gotta know if this is Chris Tucker. Let me go see. Excuse me, would you happen to be the actor and comedian known as Chris Tucker? And he's like, well, matter of fact, I am. And I'm like, my goodness, you this I don't know charismatic enigma of a human being. You're sitting here in front of me, and the juxtaposition of celebrity, right? I know you because of movies. I know you because of who you are and what you presented yourself as, and the world that you had to navigate to get in the position where yes, I'm here asking, are you the guy that I see you as, right? And most people think of celebrity and it's like, oh well, because you're known more than me, you ain't got it as bad, right? I'm gonna scale what you going through to what I'm going through, and I'm gonna minimize what you're going through because more people know what you're going through than they know what I'm going through, which
mhm.
highlights a much layered complexity of concern, right? Because it's people hurting, and then
Right.
hurt people, but it ain't always I'm gonna hurt you by hitting you. Sometimes I'm gonna hurt you by just dismissing you. I'm gonna hurt you by perpetuating negative energy and growing that negative energy because I'm feeding into it.
Right.
And when I think of the football player, I think of the pop star, or I think of anyone, right? It ain't a matter of whether or not you know, it's a matter of what you're going through. Because I got people who I love, right? Right after this, last week, I went through a crisis because someone I know and love was going through it. So I had to be attentive and be responsive. And I had to be patient. I had to be super compassionate. I had to lead with empathy because if I didn't, it could have turned worse. And that's something I've refined over time. And that was
Yeah.
something I was taught, right? And it calls into highlighting how many people are really taught these things,
Yeah.
right? If you have a society that will send a child to school knowing that they probably going home and they might not have somebody there to give them that awareness of, well, how to read the signs of support to catch somebody going through a crisis, not because you're going to solve it, but you could be of support, right? You could be just a checkpoint along the way of their journey where they know, oh, well, because I know this person is aware, they can tell me something that could hopefully get me in the right direction to deal with my crisis. Because that's where I'm seeing it right now is we don't have that. We not talking about that. We not going nowhere near it, right? We got these amateurs being exploited because the TV channel will then drive the advertisements and ad revenue for the event, and they're going to break some world records, and the residual impact will be their name just in this list, and we know them. But that doesn't mean that now they've somehow transcended life itself, right? Just because you got a rocket and you a billionaire don't mean you stop being human.
Mm-mm.
And I know this might be some spicy bites. This might be some less than savory opinions. This might be provocative, but I've been, bantering on with the, social media dynamics, but I've also had conversations with my people, and I said, y'all really got the game twisted, right? In terms
Mm.
of this level of entitlement, where it's like they a billionaire, they supposed to just buy houses, right? And I get it. People are like they could literally cure homelessness. Are they gonna cure homelessness, or are they gonna stop poverty? Right? This now,
Right.
hear me out, right?
Well, hey.
We have a government that we don't have much of a participation in, or much. Like, I know people, and this goes into another part of what we were talking about prior, right? I know people
Yeah.
who they don't care at all about who the mayor is, who the district supervisor is, who the president is, right? You saw 70 million vote on each side of the aisle, and there were still people voting in the middle, and there's people who didn't vote at all,
Right.
right? And to me, my limited view, scope, perspective, right? And we thinking about billionaires making rockets because they trying to leave us. I'm like, how many of them were the dudes who used to get just disrespected? How many of
Mm.
them were the dudes, regardless of how they were raised or who brought them up or the money they received from their family, how many times have they been hurt emotionally, right, by someone? Because there was a time period when they were nobody. There was a period
Right.
of time when they were just another person. And then as they start to have any trajectory towards financial success, people will then say things that are disrespectful and mean. And I know when I was younger and people said disrespectful, mean things to me, I'll become defensive. I feel like I got to defend myself, right? But I learned different. I was fortunate enough to have access to mental health services, to engage and have conversations with people, to kind of broaden my perspective on how to deal with these different situations. So I stopped being defensive and I started having fun with it. I started being self-deprecating, because it's like, if I'm just gonna joke on myself with you joking on me, then
Right.
we in on the same joke, right? But I'm looking at these billionaires and I'm like, I doubt they have that. I doubt it was a focus, right? If they're sitting here saying they spend 50 to $100 a week pouring themselves into their passion, and now they're these massively rich people who've had to sacrifice obviously relationships, because if you've given all your time and energy to this, that means you may not have had time for other things, right? You've made your sense of therapy your own success in the financial scope of a capitalistic market, a capitalistic society, right? Shout out to Alfluent last week for saying nonprofits operating in a capitalistic world. It's literally every reason why I'm like, yeah, I got to go. But back to the idea of billionaires and the sense of empathy. They getting on rockets, leaving us, and we have an expectation they're supposed to help us. But I have to call in the question: what's happened along the trajectory and the route and the path of them being in the position that they're in now, in our relationship and dialogue with them to build on humanity, right? Because to me, if I'm in a position and I didn't have these different tools that I have access to now, the first thing I'm saying is, yeah, y'all keep talking. I'm about to be gone. Because it's not like we're organizing and protesting Tesla. It's not like we're organizing and protesting Amazon. We're not organizing around the basis of let's take whatever little dollars we have and invest in an alternative that is more representative of the people's needs. We're not doing that. There's some of
No.
us that are trying, but even then, the level of compassion and empathy is lower than the actual intensity and passion for what they're trying to make happen, right? So let me break this down.
Yep.
Compassion and empathy. I've heard so many times people say things in such a disrespectful manner just because someone doesn't see the world the same way as them. Now, a lot of these people, not to minimize everyone, because there's some that get it and there's some who don't. And I feel like there's more visible people who don't get it. When you talk disrespectfully, when I think of my upbringing and where I come from, I used to have to physically fight, be in a violent situation because of how I talk to someone. I used to get harm done to me because of how I talk to someone. What did I do? What did I learn from that? I learned maybe I shouldn't talk like this to people, because it's people who do not care about what I'm saying. They care more about how I'm saying it, right? You take
Right.
that tone with me, right? Whether it's a parent or you think you're gonna talk to me like that, right? Or you talk to somebody who's maybe just a little bit stronger or maybe a little bit more well versed with their hands. Oh, okay, I got you, bro. And it's a wrap, right? So when I come from a place of compassion and empathy, I'm reminded of how far things can go in a violent manner, because we went from fighting as kids to then witnessing my friends get murdered, right? And it would be over something that's just in what most people may see as trivial and minimal, but to me it's everything, because again, this is connecting to a different point. When you live in circumstances where you feel like the value of life is not high, then you ready to go for any reason to protect whatever identity or respect you have, because that's the value system you're living in.
All the
It
time.
don't mean it don't mean a matter of right or wrong. What matters is you gonna do me right or I'm gonna do you wrong, right?
Still navigating that right to this day.
Yeah, exactly. We seeing it right now. And the thing is, we're not changing the value system of the people living in those circumstances, right? We keep just talking about these very quick fixes instead of the long haul of work, right? For me to encompass everything that I'm saying, to even feel comfortable and confident enough to communicate to you my self-regulatory abilities, my mental health approaches, and to even feel like it's something worth sharing, it took a lot of hard work, a lot of trial and tribulation, a lot of failure to then learn that these things were the sustainable core of who I am, for me to even be here in front of anyone, right? For me to
Right.
be a person that, yes, Figo could be like, yo, I want you to be the one to help facilitate this conversation. So now, 58 weeks later, here I am, and I'm still coming through because I understand there is a need for these conversations to happen through compassion and empathy. I'm not going to be
Right.
disrespectful, right? I may have said some things that are a little provocative for the sake of entertainment, but in the grand scheme of it, compassion and empathy has remained paramount through it all, because I've never once said, let's go fight, right? Let's go and incite violence. Let's go and destroy, right? I may have been a critic of certain behaviors and certain elements, and it's been on both sides. I've tried my best to be fair to both sides, because I see this world of these two parties, or I see this world of two sides, and I'm like, I'm a person where I have two halves to one brain. I have two hands that have two different functions. I've somehow been able to maintain this balance with all of these different variables of differences within myself. And yet, this balance is not reflected in the world around me,
No.
right? Because when I hear and see people who are upset, rightfully so, right? And they're saying things in a demeanor, in a way that are super disrespectful to their fellow human beings, right? I have to call in a question. Where's the compassion and empathy? Where's the compassion and empathy for the football player who's going through CTE? Where's the compassion and empathy for the pop artist who's trying to gain autonomy over themselves? Where's the compassion and empathy for these young individuals who are committing crimes as a means of survival in their own perspective, in their own reality, right?
Right.
Where is the compassion and empathy for the people who are choosing not to get vaccinated? Where's the compassion and empathy, right? I had a conversation with someone who was like, it's illogical. It's illogical that they won't go and get vaccinated. And I'm like, you're speaking to somebody who, I grew up in an environment where majority of my family members died over various health issues, right? A lot of them were avoidable. But when you take into the scope of mental health and how that plays a factor and plays a role on being a person of color, being black in America, and how the same things that they died from is also the same high statistical markers of what black people die from in this country. And I got to look at what happened multi-generationally to my family, and I have to look at what they've been through and how it's impacted generation after generation. And then I have to put my mother to rest, my auntie to rest, my cousins to rest. And then I have to sit back and be like, what control do I really have on the world around me when I feel like my world is out of control? Now, speaking for myself, I went and got the Walking Dead shot because we all got it. So I'm a zombie. Yes, I'll say it. Just for for the sake of banter, right? I went in and got vaccinated because I wanted one less thing to have people to hold against me. That was my decision. That's my choice. I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm not saying there's any rush or need for you other than what you perceive as the need. I can't tell you, right? It's a very provocative time. It's a very sensitive time, right? There's a lot that's going into this. Some people want the stability and the rush to normalcy. And I am one that's saying there's no such thing as normalcy. The normal that we know is evolving and changing. There were once a kingdom in Egypt, and guess what? It ain't the same, right? Alexander the
There,
Great ain't no longer the great. So
there
here
was a
we
there
are,
was a library in Timbuktu, and now it's gone.
and now it's gone, right? And here we are, right? And I'm hearing people speak in such a way that is demeaning to people who are just trying to maintain some level of control, right? There's people who life and death is something that they barter with every single day, and you then think that because this global pandemic has happened, that somehow has any influence or any movement on their perspective. They've already been operating out of a life and death circumstances most of their life.
True,
They've been acting out of trauma. They've been acting out of
true,
scarcity. And yet
true.
now the expectation and the push is, I need you to do this for me. I need you to do this so I can get back to what's normal for me. Right? Instead of, what is it that I can do to change the circumstances of which you're currently living in so you can even begin to see what I feel? So you can even begin to understand what it is that I'm trying to convey to you, because as much as I care about you, I can't help but minimize everything else you're going through in light of COVID. Right? And that shouldn't even be a provocative or a tantalizing thing to say. There shouldn't be nothing about just being a human being and hearing your fellow human being go through the struggles of life and say, you know what can I do to support you and where you at? Because I've had my theories, I've had my ideas. I always got something ready to offer, and I'm willing to fail forward than to keep repeating the same steps to get this incremental inches ahead. Or actually, let's do it in the metric system, centimeters, because they seem smaller. So the thing is, I think about all this because it all connects to a level of compassion and empathy, right? I see that there is a real concern that we are losing sight of each other in light of what we believe in. Not what
Yep.
we know, because we do know we all on this planet. We do know we're all here. But what we believe in is, you're wrong, I'm right. And I don't want to hear what the other side has to say anymore. Right? We've created this divisive line where it's no longer about having civil discourse and being able to hear the other side to come to a middle ground. Now it's so stricken with a sense of pride to just, it's like it's a fear of being wrong. Right? So many times it's like I'll connect it even to UFOs. So many people say, I want to believe. Ain't nothing stopping you from believing. The thing that stops most people from believing is the chance that they could be wrong. What is wrong with that? What happens if you find out that you believed in something that wasn't true? We all at one point believed in Santa Claus, and I don't see the world going in mass hysteria just because they found out, oh, Santa Claus ain't real. Now the world ceased to exist, right?
Not me.
I'm sorry for the children that I've destroyed that dream for,
I
but
never
you can
believed.
choose. But that's what I'm saying. You could never believe. You could choose to believe. You could have believed and stop believing. But I feel like right now the strength of the belief is overpowering what we know, which is there's people in need. There's people dealing with levels of harm, and we're not thinking about what is the long-term means and road to navigate and undo the harm. We're just so quick to say, you as a billionaire with a rocket ship, you need to be the one to end it. Not my participation in the system, not my Amazon subscription. No, no, no. It's not that. It's me telling you, because you have something that I don't even have a measure on. I don't even have a scope of understanding on, that you're choosing to invest in isolation away from us than to say you're a part of us. Even though me being a part of this, I could further deepen my bond. I could further deepen my relationship with all of us to move further away from whatever it is we're afraid of, right? We're afraid of getting left. That's what it is. Oh, they getting rockets. They gonna leave us. They gonna monetize Mars. So be it, right? If you have any sense of control or any sense of belief, right? Because I'm one where I try my best to stay away from my own self-limiting beliefs. I don't try to project my doubts and fears on others, because I find it is a detrimental, like, just, it's hurtful, harmful, and destructive to people's consciousness and their confidence and who they are and what their their possibilities are, right? But I feel like it had to be said. Compassion and empathy is something that I think that we're lacking. And back to the idea of someone getting a shot, right? People are now, as we're finding out, getting arrested for having fake cards. And to me, I still have I mean my government, which has been the one to message why I should do it, right? They just had a pop artist in the White House to message to the younger generation why they should do it, right?
Mm.
You need to get vaccinated because I'm gonna leverage my fame. Here we are, the government, which is supposed to be, I mean, it's just a different class of fame processing anyway, right? Popularity votes and all that, electoral, whatever that means. But we took a pop artist, had her come in to then message to younger people who are resistant to something in hopes that this could possibly be something to change the tide, whether or not this person even actually got it done. Because when you look even deeper, right,
That's
I
true.
went when I went to go get the shot, and I was looking at the levels of like semi disrespect, because the dude administering the shots having a conversation over to the side saying, did you get it? And somebody's like, yeah. And then they asked the guy who gave me the shot, did you get it? Hell no, I ain't get it. I'm like, well, thank you for giving me confidence in any sense of me making the right choice, because in the grand scheme of things, how do we ever really know, right? How do
Well,
you
that's the thing,
know
right? It's like it's
if
not about
you
right or wrong if you're placed in a survival, situation.
I mean, it's not even right or wrong if you got to hook up with a doctor who's willing to bend their ethics to put you into a database to say, yeah, you got it when you don't,
Yeah, that
right?
too.
But we don't want to look at we don't even want to touch on that minimize that small segment, that minority, right? Just as much as we don't even touch on the fact that there have been people who've been negatively impacted by the vaccine. We don't even give them the time of day, right? We give them a news blip, and then we keep it pushing and say, well, that was just one time, right? Even though that one time could have been somebody's sister, somebody's cousin, somebody's friend, and that could have a ripple effect in their community, which can then linger in other people's own insecurity of things that have been that one time for them, right? That one time I lost my grandma to an accidental dose of a medication at the hospital, right? Or
Or
the
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 time I
one
lost my
time.
grandma to COVID.
Exactly, right? Or the government that keeps promising me a better day or a better tomorrow, when in reality all they doing is just lying to me. And now I don't want to hear what they have to say. I don't want to hear what their self-appointed doctors or their educated expertise or their data or their stats. I don't want to hear it anymore, because I've been living my life in the shadow of what they've been doing. And now I'm supposed to all of a sudden participate just so y'all can get back to normal, when my normal is a constant hell. My normal is a constant trial and tribulation of navigating the pitfalls of life. And you want me to go and be supportive of what you got going on? And I think that's the biggest thing that whether you believe in a Trump or whether you believe in a Biden, whether you voted for one or the other, I think that is one of the most tying binds, is the sense of distrust, the lack of faith, the lack of a real relationship to these people that we're supposed to believe in. And then now we're seeing it resolve itself in this global health crisis that no one wants to really have a honest, open, and in-depth conversation without minimizing the other person's perspective and voice. And to me, that is the biggest problem. And that is the reason why I'm saying compassion and empathy over and over again, because it takes compassion and empathy to even begin to see someone else's perspective in this without disrespecting them, minimizing them, and invalidating their insecurities and fears at a time where we're all scared.
And I think that's a tough approach for most people. One, to either work to be understood, or the effort it takes to understand. Um, and a few things that you touched on, it's like the differences are kind of thematic throughout the different groups, whether it's the billionaire with enough money to leave the planet, to relocate off planet, and the folks who have to stay, not understanding his perspective, nor his or her perspective, or the the billionaire not understanding the perspective of those who are who have to stay behind. Like, the billionaire never has to think about what it's like to stay behind. because he has the means to find a way out. Just like the person who says, "Oh, I'm not going to get the vaccine," and choosing not to understand those who do receive the vaccine, or people who do receive the vaccine not choosing to understand those who refuse to get it. They the disconnect is there, but like you said, it's a lack of compassion and empathy where folks have some people have right the ability to take a chance. Some people feel like it's taking a chance to be active or not be active. Uh, for for those who right have a history or have a historical knowledge of what the government has done, at least what multiple governments have done to their constituents to scapegoat a group or to scapegoat drugs or to scapegoat a community. Anyone who has historical knowledge of that, they'll say, well, it's not in my best interest to take a chance with this institution, this government that I know can harm me without my knowledge. And other folks will say, well, I have a historical knowledge and awareness of what governments do, but this doesn't align with that because it's an emergency. And what I know is that someone has told me that this is the best option. And we don't know what possibilities have been exhausted to find the best way to navigate you know this pandemic, but we do know that some people are taking chances on either side. And like I say, if if you get a vaccine, if you get the shot, you're part of the trial and the experiment. If you don't get the shot, you're part of the trial and experiment. People who have received the shot or two are still getting sick, are still getting the coronavirus, and still suffering, and still getting sick, um, and being stuck at home. And some people are going to the hospital, and like just like when there was no vaccine, people were sure that the government was underreporting how many people were getting sick. And now that there is a vaccine, people are sure that the government is underreporting how many people who are fully vaccinated are getting sick, and they're only reporting on or over-reporting on the unvaccinated who've gotten sick. And the agenda for someone going to space is, we already know it's messed up, but I can do something about it, right? Can you? And the empathy, right, Beth? Yep, it is important, and the respect is needed across the board. We need to see, each other as humans, and respect that humanity, and that the more options you have, you know, puts your perspective in one place, and right the less options you have, put your perspective somewhere else, and there needs to be discourse between those sides within communities, so that there is an understanding that can be like, it can create a lot of clarity for people if they would just have those conversations without feeling insulted or belittled or diminished or dismissed, or even abandoned, right? That one person has one perspective, because people feel abandoned just by perspective before a choice is even made. Just because of the disagreement, people can feel rejected and abandoned. And it's important that we acknowledge that can happen during these dialogues, and that folks need to find a way to navigate after the hurt, right? Navigate that healing and that reconciliation after the fact. But if somebody goes to the moon, right, we may not hear from them again.
Might
But
not hear from them again.
if they go to the moon, they say, "Oh well, I'm gonna need a workforce, or I'm gonna need to find a way back." Um, you know, then we may hear from them again, and maybe they'll say, "Well, it's not so bad up here. Y'all should come too."
You never know.
Right, right.
Shout
Or
shout out to Beth for the very important respect is needed. Just to shout that out.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, right. Or folks like, well, you know, it ain't all it's cracked up to be. It's not really a lot of cheese on the moon like we thought it was, and I really miss pizza, and moon pizza is not it. So I'm gonna come on back. Leave the trash that I found and that I took to space. Go leave that there, and bring some
Again,
more trash. Bring some more trash back to the planet.
yeah. I mean, I just it's tough when we tell children about accountability and responsibility, and it's hard because the game is like this, right? Let it go, let it go. Do the best to minimize or remove the tethers you have to the worldly goods and possessions or the harm that was caused to you, and let it go.
Yep.
Let it go, right? And I feel like it's an unspoken philosophy and practice of the United States government when it comes to what is done in the past, right? If we get caught or if we find out what we've done in the past, right? We acknowledge it 100 years later, 80 years later, 60 years later. Well, it's been so long, we can't hold anybody accountable because they're gone.
Mm.
No, we can hold the system accountable. We can hold the system responsible because there's people who benefit from its structure and its advancement from the atrocities that were done in the past,
And
but
continue to
often
benefit.
that continue to benefit the few, and it's a veiled and illusioned perspective on who benefits most, right? Because I benefit, that means the person who doesn't benefit, well, oh well, that's on them, right? It's a choice. It's their choice to be in a position, in a predicament they're in. When we know, right, there's a lot of intersectionality around when were you born, where were you born, who were you born to, then as you came up, what did you have access to, and what at what points did you have a level of intervention that assisted you along the way or may have redirected you along the way to be in a position that was more advantageous or more prosperous than the next person that you just may not even care or think wants to bat an eyelash at, right? And I say that because as you were saying everything right around the respect and around, I always go back to this, right? I always go back to like, how do I charge the US government for its atrocities so that way we can just hold them accountable and responsible for their actions, right? Like we could take it as far back as to blankets with smallpox, or we could come a little bit closer to redlining. I mean, we could talk about the indigenous American schools, the boarding schools where they pretty much try to eradicate the culture and the languages and the practices of the indigenous tribes. We could talk about the Tuskegee experiments. We could talk about Henrietta Lacks. We could talk about, you know, all these different things that have happened, right? We could talk about like Black Wall Street. We could talk about some putting people in cages and separating families from each other. We could talk about it. And my thing is, at what point do we acknowledge it and then say, you know what, we're gonna actually commit ourselves to repairing the harm. And this is how we're going to repair the harm, not just by saying we acknowledge it and apologizing or writing some doctrine. No, what's the policy look like? What is the actual next steps and actions for a sustainable way of repairing the harm? Because the harm is around you, right? And to me, right, it's a thing where I'm just looking for the change, right? I'm looking for the opportunity for something different. I'm looking for the innovation or the creation of something new because I'm a believer in that, right? We all use our phones and love them, but at some point we didn't have them. They didn't exist. It was the new thing and now it's become the norm. It's become the dependency, right? And I think that that's kind of how I see the social issues or the struggles that we have in society around our apathetic nature to politics, right? We can always, retweet and share and get lost in our little echo chambers on social media. But when we really start to talk to the people around us that we see on a day to day, it's so varied and excuse me, so different in terms of what it is that they feel and what they see, that are we really are we like, like I always said it like this: if the last election is any measure, there's 70 million people on one side and 70 million people on the other side. So are we not in the act of trying to convince people to join another perspective or join another side? Like, are we just saying, you know what, you stay over there, I'm gonna stay over here, you screw off, I don't want to hear what you got to say, you're dumb, I don't want to hear what you got to say? Or am I going to be like, hey, I just want to know, how did you get to this point, right? Just like we interview people on here all the time, and I say, how did you get to this point, right? Having that same discourse with just another person with a different perspective and saying, how did you get to this point? Because I'm just a believer that through a conversation we can discover so much and understand each other to a degree where I can see how you got to this point, and then maybe through enough conversation and enough relationship building, you would care to see things differently. You would care to broaden your perspective. I think that it's important because in the same conversation that I had with somebody around why do people, like, why are they being illogical and not getting the shot? The same
Right.
conversation, I started asking them questions about how did they get to this point, right? Asking them where they grew up, how did they get here to where they are now, right? And through the understanding and being able to relate and understand how these different touch points, these different events shape them, then I was able to pull from my own experiences to get them to see things from a different angle or different perspective. And I think there's power in that. I believe there's power in it. I'm just hoping that through these conversations and people listening and joining us and participating and giving us their commentary and perspective, we can create more open dialogue and more perspectives around these different subjects, because it is necessary. As much
Right.
as I can romanticize a billionaire with a rocket solving all of our problems, I still have a belief in us, whoever us is, to be able to change and resolve the issues that we face and that we're up against. I have this unbelievable belief. But, I'm not saying everybody got to have it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with saying, you know what, I ain't got nothing to do with that. You, by all means, you have the means and the right to maintain that distance. And if it makes you feel safe, I want you to be safe. I want you to feel okay. I want you to feel like you got you, even if no one else got you.
Right.
I mean, it's important for you, going back to respect yourself first, to understand what respect means to you. What does loving you mean to you? So that way, your boundaries, your space, and your capacities when it comes to those around you. Because I don't see it that much, right? I see so much more quick to judge than quick to love. And I'm not saying love as in make yourself vulnerable to be hurt. I'm saying love with the necessary boundaries and capacity and defining markers of what love is for yourself. So that way you can protect yourself and you can help heal from whatever it is that ails you. Because my goodness, people got the game so twisted. Like, man, every song I love money and I need me this and I'm gonna buy me that and I'm gonna self-soothe with all of these possessions that at the end of the day don't mean nothing, because 10 years later they start denouncing everything they once rapped about, and they're like, oh yeah, no, I was like that when I was younger, but I've come to learn and understand it's all it's a falsehood, it's fallacy, it's a lie, it's a fairy tale. And there's room for that growth and understanding, but how many times do you got to keep having somebody tell you what's up before you actually listen and be like, you know what, maybe it's time to evolve in a different fashion, maybe it's trying to really do something new, right? Because skinny jeans ain't new. If you really look back at the 80s and you look at the rappers back then, it's a cycle, it's a circle. And I'm saying this, we can make the cycle a little bit bigger, we can make the circle a little bit bigger. I mean, come on, let's be thoughtful, right? Ain't nothing really new.
But remember, there wasn't as many people who are overweight in the 80s, just statistically.
I mean, we didn't have hot Cheetos, and we did have crack. Okay, so let's be really real.
And it
There was a
was a
lot
lot
of
of, and it was
things,
and it was a lot more dancing
a lot more dancing. There was a lot. Oh
coming out of the
man, was
60s,
there
70s.
dance? Man, everybody was dancing. Like
Everybody was dancing. So like
it's
you could
some
wear
good
skinny
cardio.
jeans.
Like
You could wear
have you?
skinny jeans, and it makes sense for you to dance in those skinny jeans.
I don't know
Now,
about that,
as
but I get what you're saying.
they was breakdancing, they was doing it.
They made it happen. They definitely did. They was definitely doing it. Like I don't. It was made from different materials. I tell you, American made goods back then. Well, they was American made first, and then second, the durability on some Levi's back then. I don't even know if it's even measurable to today's standards. But you right, like cardio, crack cocaine, and the lack of food. That definitely led. Let me stop. The reality is, right?
No,
Hot
I mean
Cheetos exist.
when you talk about
The
rappers,
McFlurry. You talk about the
right?
McFlurry, right? When you
Talk
talk
about
about
rappers, you talk
M and
about the
M's and
McRib.
Skittles. They didn't have no McRib in the 80s. You see? You
That's what
see?
I'm saying. There was Taco Bell, only had two tacos in they dollar menu.
I mean, people wasn't sitting down on their lunch breaks just on their phone looking at what was happening. Like it wasn't that sedentary, right? It was like there was movement, right? It's like, oh, I'm about to go. I'm gonna have to go for a walk on my break real quick. I'm about to go. You want to roll with me? All right, let's go on this lunch break together. Let's walk. Let's go get. You know what I'm saying? But now it's like, oh, what you? I'm sitting down. I'm gonna just stare at the screen, and the calories ain't burning, right? The weight's
So
being gained. The arteries getting clogged.
the interesting thing about the brain activity, right, or the lack of brain activity from the scrolling, right, versus having a conversation, right, is is measurable. First of all, that is measurable at all, right? If you can just relate being in the classroom and thinking and critically thinking and having an exchange with students and a teacher, and then to a point where you are no longer processing anything but patterns, and not creating patterns, right? Just
Well, the
processing, right?
endorphins,
Being
right? I'm just trying
but
to get.
if you
I'm
don't,
just trying to get the release of dopamine by scrolling. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to get the release of dopamine. I want that sense of gratification, validation, that sense of like, ooh, I got that one thing that entertained me.
right, well, that's what makes it repeatable, right? It's the dopamine that makes it repeatable.
McFlurry. I'm just saying
Right.
they had him back then. The McFlurry was not popping in the '80s. Shout out to Christian for coming through and saying McFlurry because the McFlurry wasn't even in. It wasn't even. You know what I'm saying? Like you bring up a good point, right? The we could take it to the scale of race, right? Because I'm not talking about race theory. I'm talking about racism. That's real. That's a real thing. We can track that. That's actually happened. I don't want to hear about theoretical anything. Racism has happened. That was a factual, real thing that's currently going on. It currently exists. I can actually go pull up any number. Like I remember my little sister. It was a couple years ago. She got attacked by some people on some virtual stuff, right? Even just when they find out, like, oh, she play games online, they be like, oh, you a black girl, oh, you ain't out there, and it's just racism, right? That's not
That's
race theory, that's racism, right? Racism is an
that's
actual thing. So
true.
I just want to get that clear. Listen, we could educate on racism, so we could take it to race, or we could take it to just class, right? Poverty, right? How it is accessible for people in impoverished communities. That's white, black, brown, yellow, red, you name it. They have access to things that are so calorically dense in terms of calories, but not nutrition, right? Not nutritional value, not things that are actually feeding the body, other than a satiating appetite, right? The endorphins, right? The endorphins. This tastes good, so I'm gonna eat some more, right? And it's cheap and it's accessible, right? In terms of accessibility, right? Um, Thinking about that, and you take it back, right? The industrialized scope of the world wasn't as much of a grip and a hold as it is right now. So yeah, in the '80s, when we look at it and that we look at the sense of diabetes and the health scales of what's going on, it wasn't even the same. But now, as we move further and further into the future, we start to see like, yeah, there's more access to what can harm you than there's ever been. And at some point, we have to be very conscientious of self-selecting, right? Like really being aware of like, okay, I'm conscious of my actions and how it's going to impact me in the long term. Because CTE, I play a game of football. I'm not thinking about the future, right? My mom didn't have any awareness when I was a child. She was just like, "You're gonna go and throw yourself on the concrete anyway, so might as well be in a field of grass and you wearing a helmet instead of just running into cars. So go play, right?" Had she had the information awareness, maybe the differences may have been grand for me. Who knows, right? I mean, it's just you never know. But if you don't have access and awareness and you don't have the ability to have a conversation and to gain some insight, oh, we just gonna keep doing the same thing over and over.
Also, protective helmets have come a long way.
Long way. Because I for surely
So,
with this gigantic watermelon, I was wearing them linemen. I ain't that big. I'm like 5'6", and I was wearing a lineman helmet. You know, anybody know about linemen? They had a straight cage. It was like watching somebody's front gate of their house.
but
It's
yeah, but
nothing but
that
bars.
had more to do that had more to do with a lack of resources.
Of course, I went to an inner
That
city San Francisco school where we didn't have our own designated gym class time period for football, unlike some of the other outlying regions inside California. San
nor a
Francisco
football field
football,
or practice field.
for real, it's limited to like what would you say the number of like dedicated schools that have really good in San Francisco, right? Really good football programs where
Public
there's an
school,
investment. Yeah, public school.
6.
And we have like what 10 or 12 high schools, probably more than
Yeah,
that.
like 12, 13.
Yeah. So you think about it, right? If you didn't get to make it to one of those schools and you had to deal with the, scarcity and equipment and what we got, don't forget Wallenberg. It's like one of those things where you just don't have really the means to adequate anything. You're just making do with what you got. And then you got to go up against them teams. Oh man,
Wallenberg didn't have a football team.
you're right. You're right. You're right. But that even goes to say, like, we have a high school that don't even have a football team, right? There was a period
Well,
of time when certain high schools,
It's like
yeah,
four high schools that didn't have football teams.
yeah. So it's one of those things where you really got to like zoom out and realize like we may have space for people, we ain't got space for everything, and even within those that have space for some of those things, only a few gonna get the best of the best. So, it's just it's a, you know, people, let's come together, let's join hands, let's speak on it, let's say what we need, let's get what we want.
Well, with the size of the school at 1,100 in the school population, probably should not have been a football team in the first place.
I mean, we were struggling. I was on varsity. I was in the ninth grade. I was like, they was like, "Hey, you got legs? Take this jersey, put it on." I'm like, okay.
No, but also the fact that this the number of players was too small. Just the sample size of students to pull from, the pool of potential student athletes is very
Yeah,
very small
it was very
compared to
small.
most high schools, compared to a lot of cities. Um, but that's that's not surprising, to the system and in a city, and how safety is uh, depicted or viewed, in the inner city for inner city children, single parent homes, single income homes. Um, yeah, it's not surprising, and safety is still an issue at this point within the city, as we see that with the unhoused population and the transient population within the city and county of San Francisco and other major cities. It's just, we see that with the increase in domestic violence. We see that with the increase in, violence toward folks with mental health issues, violence, from folks dealing with mental health issues. Safety is not at the forefront of, budgetary priorities, yet defense is the number one priority for the country's budget.
Deterrence. We got none but deterrence. We gonna deter you from thinking about it, right? Like, man, that still works. It's still working. Just deterring people. Yep, we gonna deter you. We got big guns. We got big guns. We got big missiles. We got big bombs. We gonna deter you. Not now. We ain't trying to have a conversation about what you need and what we need and how we could somehow meet in the middle and compromise. Nah.
And we
I
got
got
sports.
I got exactly, which are just mini wars that we fight every day.
Well,
Right?
it's also
People,
just a chance for escapism, and
it is a chance for escapism. That is true. And there is benefits and beauty within it. And I love it. But it's many wars. It's literally many wars. When you think about it, it's like we're not gonna kill you. The objective is to win the game. But when you see how people react, not everyone, just the ones on the extreme, you would think this was like a mini world war. Like it was like, oh, we've accomplished and conquered this year
oh,
our mini war.
and fans who identify with these teams do become violent and do become homicidal.
They do. They become destructive. They become violent, right? And we never have I ever once heard, well, we should ban that team. Never. Imagine that. I've heard it for various causes where it's like, oh, there, that group right there, that one that's protesting, because of this one individual who decided to act in violence that one time, that one day, now we condemn the whole group. But I could go repeatedly through history of so many different fans of so many different teams, and not once have I ever heard the conversation go to, you know what, the whole league is the problem. That franchise, that team, that company, that is the problem. Right? They could be wearing, they could say they the biggest fan, have the hat, have the jersey on. Their social media could have every tag and every line from every bit of this organization. And as soon as they or commit themselves to an act of harm to someone else that could be deadly or detrimental, never once is the conversation ever lean to, you know what, that whole team is a problem. But as soon as it's done in the name of any number of organizations, anyone. Oh, it's the whole movement. I don't agree with the whole movement. The whole movement's violent. Even if it's a couple isolated incidences, even if they're dealing with multi-generational trauma and violence, because that's the world we operate out of, right? Like y'all want to get really real. You want to take it really real. Y'all keep talking greasy, and one of these people gonna take you up on, well, you want to fight? Because again, we're moving into a future where it's not about fighting, it's going to be about destruction, right? And there's people who are willing, we've already seen it, it's already happening. It's happened time and time again. There's people who are willing to lose their lives for nothing. There are people, unfortunately, because they have no relationship to mental health, they are willing to lose their lives for anything. They're willing to throw caution to the wind. And I am all for compassion and empathy. You may not like me. You may not like the color of my skin. You may think of me as a joke. You can say and feel whatever you want to feel. And if you're willing to have a conversation with me, I'm willing to have a conversation with you. Because I've seen it happen many times before where some level of compassion, empathy, and understanding can make a friend out of an enemy. Cause y'all keep being disrespectful. It's gonna be somebody somewhere who ain't gonna take it, and they gonna be like, "Look, I got a crew of people who willing to do whatever. So you keep talking your mess, because now
Well,
I ain't talking no more." And I want that to not be the case. I don't want that to ever come about. But as I keep seeing more and more in the light of assassinations, the destruction of just governments and people in harm. I'm telling y'all, one is enough for me. I don't need two. One, it already done happened many times. I don't want to see another one. But again, compassion, empathy, exercise it, learn it, because I think it could be the turning point for us in creating a healthy and a harm reduction world, and create something that is restorative and repairing to what the damage that's already been done.
Thank you.
People be out here greasy, deep
But
fried.
as we come to an end of this episode, and we look to take some of these topics and expound on them within our daily lives. Shinio, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with?
Love yourself. Love yourself. We got, what is this? Jonathan coming through. Literally, we was in Bible study and the topic was loving your enemies. I also brought up MLK's quote, "A riot is the language of the unheard."
That's
And
right.
those words can be ever more true, right? A riot is the language of the unheard. If you keep, we could quote Tupac, right? I'm gonna knock on the door. Hey, I'm hungry. Let me in. I keep knocking. I'm gonna bust the door down and I'm coming through and I'm taking whatever I want, right? And you can minimize however someone feels, but I can't. I'm gonna do my best to not do that because it's harmful. It hurts to have someone feel like what they're feeling is not real. I remember so many times these educated individuals who don't come from where I come from, who, they're in power positions or positions of authority or positions of control, and they would say, is this a perceived threat or is this an actual threat? Perception is reality. And I'll leave it at that. So, Alfluent, do you have anything for the people as we get to the close on episode 58 of the Lyrical Ones podcast?
Uh, just try to move with patience and understanding for yourself, and try to acknowledge the full situation that you live and exist in, because understanding that will help you to better understand the choices that you make and the reasons why you make them. And if you can understand where you coming from, right, then you can explain it to someone else and promote understanding, um, by sharing your side of the story. But if you're not acknowledging the state and the situation and the circumstance that you're in, then it can be very difficult to explain that to someone else who may need that to understand and comprehend your your words and your perspective, and not just your tone and how you say something. So yeah, just operate out of grace and patience for yourself. Be patient enough to see what's happening in and around you.
No, it's real. Thank you for that. Compassion and empathy, y'all. And as we like to do with this time,
One, 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 one.